So in November, because I got wrapped up in work and just the regular madness of the holiday preparations that, typically go into like Thanksgiving and Christmas, since that's rapidly approaching, I did not buy a ton of games in November. I did still pick up a few, and I did actually go ahead and fire up a few of the games I've been neglecting from Humble Choice over the past few months. But despite the fact that we are racing towards the holidays, which is usually like this vibrant and colorful time, the first entry on this list is not vibrant and colorful at all, but it is an absolutely gorgeous game, and that is Trek to Yomi. Now, I've been neglecting this game for just about a year at this point since its release, but ultimately in Trek to Yomi you'll play as a young swordsman in training named Hiroki who's in the midst of getting trained up by his master Senjuro. But it doesn't take long for tragedy to strike as your training is cut short thanks to some bandits attacking your village. I knew this game had been done in the style of classic samurai flicks, and its 2D side-scrolling gameplay apparently was also influenced by silent films of the 20s and 30s, with each area meant to evoke the look of a theater stage more than a screen, and I think it really nails this. In combat scenarios, it looks like you're watching a moment just sort of frozen in time play out, and in the more open environmental exploration moments, you really feel sucked in here thanks to well-framed camera movements and smart use of depth of field. Using a good mix of follow and fixed camera perspectives from moment to moment, the direction is just top notch, and it's the sort of attention to detail that made me really just want to walk slowly through each new area rather than just rush from one objective to the next. I actually found myself frequently just sort of hanging out and appreciating each new area that I wandered into, and even the transition from one area to the next is completely seamless with almost no loading times to speak of. If you've ever played a side-scrolling 2D action game before, you'll have a pretty good idea of how to navigate its combat and world. You'll start off with light and heavy attacks, blocks, parries, and counterattacks, before unlocking a few more offensive options the deeper in you get. It all feels pretty familiar, and while it's somewhat challenging at times, there are tons and tons of save and checkpoints as you progress, so even when I got bested by some random bandit, it really didn't take long to jump back into the action. Trek to Yomi is mostly linear, but there are some branching paths and hidden areas where you can find upgrades for Hiroki, though it does kind of suffer from that point of no return problem where it's not always clear if you're headed down the main path or potentially some side path where you'll just miss an area of exploration because you drop down into an area that you can't climb back to. It's a fairly minor complaint, but if you're the completionist sort, you might find this a little bit annoying. Also, given its black and white nature, sometimes it can be hard to spot interactive elements in the environment, but if you're thorough, you should be alright. Steam Deck performance is good, but I wouldn't say exceptional. By default, the visuals are set to the Epic setting, which made the frame rate pretty uneven, but after I manually defined the resolution as 720 and dropped things like shadow quality to high or medium, it stayed closer to 50 FPS, so this is really a good candidate for locking the frame rate down to 40 to get a better balance of visual fidelity to performance. And even though I love playing in handheld mode, I may actually wrap this one up in docked mode since the scenes are just so gorgeous to look at that it might be better on the big screen. But however you play it, if you have any fondness for old samurai flicks or just a compelling story with a gorgeous setting, Trek to Yomi certainly delivers, even if the combat feels a little too by the numbers at times. Well, and assuming you don't mind a grayscale presentation, which, speaking of which, that's probably an excellent segue to the next game on this list, which also has a very monochromatic aesthetic, although I will say that by just sheer virtue of just wit and charm and writing, I really got sucked into this one, and that is Restless Soul. In Restless Soul, you'll play as, well, a restless soul. Specifically, a recently departed ghost who's trying to find your way back to life. But between the Grim Reaper, King Minion, and Dr. Cruel, which I think I'm pronouncing correctly, you'll definitely have your work cut out for you. On the presentation front, Restless Soul looks and, well, plays like if you dropped a Paper Mario game onto the original Game Boy. Again, it has a monochrome color palette, and most of its story is doled out through text. And speaking of Mario, I'm pretty sure the developer just straight up copy-pasted at least a couple of Mario Bros. 3 sound effects, but hey, I'm not complaining, and it comes off as a very much loving homage more than, any sort of a rip-off or something like that. And if you've ever played any of the Paper Mario games, I imagine you'll feel right at home here. You'll float around interacting with a range of, well, I guess I can't say colorful characters, but interesting characters, and the writing is fun in that meta sort of way, poking fun at video game tropes and conventions. Not exactly earth-shattering stuff here, but it was charming enough to hold my interest and had me laughing out loud at least a few times. When you're not chatting up NPCs, you'll engage in some light platforming here and there, minigames, and also some light bullet hell battling. Performance is rock solid at 60 FPS without needing to make any adjustments on the Steam Deck, which isn't a huge surprise, I guess. And the presentation probably won't be for everyone, but I personally really liked its black and white Virtual Boy sort of vibe, and I really wish more games would adopt this sort of style, even if it's not necessarily revolutionary or anything. So if you don't mind a monochrome look and just want a light, charming meta adventure, I think it's definitely worth a look, particularly if you can find it on sale. Alright, next up let's move on to some more colorful fare with a game that was just popping up in my recommendations over and over again, but for whatever reason I never decided to take the leap, but it was included in a Humble Bundle recently, so I went ahead and, finally checked it out, and that is Souldiers. And kind of continuing the theme of retro sensibilities for this month, this game looks like it could have come straight out of the Game Boy Advance library, and was probably the biggest and best surprise I got for new games that I tried out in November. But between this so-so cover art and kind of a goofy name, you'd be forgiven for overlooking it. But this colorful Metroidvania grabbed and more importantly held my attention a lot longer than I was expecting. Even though I do think that the story and premise are a little unremarkable, the gameplay, environments, and visuals are all pretty first-rate. In Souldiers, you'll choose from one of 3 classes before kicking off your adventure, but at its core you'll play as a fallen soldier who's ventured into the unknown after getting trapped in a cave thanks to a recent change in your army strategy. A Valkyrie appears to you and your brothers in arms to guide you on an adventure beyond the world you know, and before long you'll be exploring a fairly expansive Metroidvania-esque map, engaging in combat, and solving platforming puzzles to unlock new abilities and push even further into its world. Again, if you're a Metroidvania fan, you'll probably eat this up on its gameplay merits alone, and I'm positive that's what kept me playing much longer than I'd planned to initially. No, it's not as gripping or polished as something like Hollow Knight, but it does an admirable job of crafting a world that's vibrant, colorful, and really just fun to explore. Combat feels tight and responsive, if not a little overly familiar, and there's a good sense of progression as you unlock new abilities and collectibles, from armor enhancements to the requisite 4 pieces of whatever to increase your health pool. Now, one thing that I didn't like about this game is that you are locked into whatever class you've chosen at the beginning with no ability to switch on the fly. I went with the default soldier/melee class against my better judgment, and after getting a feel for the enemies, realized I probably should have chosen an archer or a mage for a ranged approach. Still, I found that enemies dropped enough health items to keep it from being a slog, and kudos to the devs for making sure that each save point fully restores your health, which is exactly as it should be in any good Metroidvania, in my personal opinion. Just like Restless Soul, this one's a rock-solid performer out of the gate with no adjustments necessary on the Steam Deck, so you can just jump right into the action and be sure that gameplay will stay fluid throughout. Is it the best Metroidvania that you can play on the deck? No, it definitely has some missteps, but I have to say it's better than the sum of its parts, and if you can snatch it up at a discount during the upcoming winter sale, it's worth checking out if you're a fan of the genre. Next up, getting even more colorful, although this time in a more retro arcadey sort of way, this is a game that I've actually had a physical copy of sitting on my shelf forever for the PS5, but because it did show up in the humble choice, I was like, you know what, let's just go ahead and check it out on the deck and see how it performs there, and that is Arcade Paradise. In Arcade Paradise, you've been tasked with running your dad's laundromat, which isn't terribly exciting on its face, but where it gets interesting is that there are a few arcade machines in the building. It doesn't take long for you to realize that the arcade games pull in more dough than doing the laundry, and so begins your transformative journey to build up your very own arcade. The gameplay loop is pretty straightforward simulator fare, where initially you'll be taking out the trash, depositing the day's take in the safe, and well, doing a lot of laundry. But it doesn't take long for you to get enough dough to start ordering more machines, and further fleshing out your budding arcade business. And in between more menial tasks, you can take breaks to play those machines, which offer up a variety of little mini-games from air hockey to a Bejeweled clone, which honestly to me is more of a Zookeeper clone because I love that game on the DS. And even a weird hybrid of GTA and Pac-Man, which works surprisingly well. Also, on a quick side note before I forget, and while we're on the subject of Pac-Man, my buddy John over at GenXGrownUp is doing a 24 Days of Pac-Man advent calendar over on his channel, which I think is a really novel approach to, the standard YouTube templates that you would normally see here. And I'd highly recommend checking out their channel because there are a bunch of sweeties over there and pretty much my personal authority on a lot of the pre-NES gaming era, so if you're an Atari fan in particular, you should definitely check them out. Alright, with that quick plug for my buddy out of the way, I'm still pretty early in Arcade Paradise, but I think it shows some promise as a lightweight simulator, and while the early portions feel a little bit grindy, I mean that kinda makes sense, right? You're on a journey to build a business, and while gaming's a part of it, there's also going to be a lot of grunt work involved. The tedium's slightly offset by the minigame approach to things like unclogging a toilet or taking out the trash, but yeah, I'll have to spend more time with it on this one before I can really say anything more definitive about it. But what I can say definitively is that just like Souldiers, it does run at a solid 60 FPS without any adjustments necessary, so you get a pretty smooth experience from the jump, which I definitely always appreciate. And honestly, I don't always expect from smaller indie titles, since it seems like more often than not, those tend to have kind of, so-so performance on the Steam Deck without a little bit of tweaking involved. So if you're a fan of the simulator genre and like a game with an underdog premise and a Scott Pilgrim-y sort of retro aesthetic about it, this one might be worth checking out. And finally, because Christmas is closing in a few short weeks, and I'm a huge fan of low-poly PS1 aesthetic graphics, this next one is a very questionable stealth murder sim from the lovely developers at Puppet Combo, Christmas Massacre. Initially, Christmas Massacre takes place during the Christmas of 1959, where our protagonist Larry is a young boy at, I believe, a boarding school and is not allowed to go to the Christmas party. Instead, you're forced to go to bed by a nun and miss out on the festivities. And predictably, this sort of starts Larry's origin story in a Michael Myers-esque fashion. Fast forward 20 years later to a few days before Christmas, where you'll find that the experience really did stick with Larry, and in short order you'll be acting under the direction of a talking Christmas tree that implores you to kill. The gameplay loop is effectively stealth action, where each level has you trying to carve up every victim as quickly as possible, ideally without getting spotted. You'll crouch and operate under cover of darkness to stay concealed, which should be pretty familiar if you are a Manhunt fan. If you do get spotted, you'll have a limited window to hunt down your prey and dispatch them before failing, but even if you do, it's no biggie because you can restart quickly, and in that respect it plays very much like a lo-fi 3D version of Hotline Miami. At the end of each mission, you'll be able to get a readout of how your performance was based on whether Larry was spotted and how quickly you cleared the level. And you can always hop back into a specific location to try again from the menu if you'd like to revisit some prior locations. As far as tools at your disposal, you can go first person or third, and use a corner peek ability to stalk your prey from the shadows. Also, you can hit a fast forward button which speeds up the action tremendously, which is a really brilliant inclusion because sometimes stealth action games can drag while you're just studying enemy behavior to get the patterns down, so I thought this was a really nice quality of life inclusion. Atmospherically, it's exactly what you'd expect from this type of game, where everything has a chunky PS1 look, and a variety of video filters that you can apply to make it look dingy or just, period appropriate. Now, some players will look at these graphics and think that they're low effort and rough, and while that's not technically wrong, for me that's a huge draw. And rough as it may appear on the surface, the big thing that Puppet Combo games get right that a lot of AAA games fail at is atmosphere. Sure, its PS1 era polygonal graphics may come across fairly simple, but there's an immersion to how they're utilized that just makes it feel amazing to play, and also just, well, an easy world to get sucked into, if not a sort of weird and demented one. I mean, to be fair, you do start off dispatching a nun after all. Also on a side, but also related note, I did put up a community post about this game the other day, because while I was playing it, I actually found that there was a TV that was playing the entirety of a 1973 slasher called Silent Night, Bloody Night, and yeah, I just think it's really cool when games do this. When it comes to Christmas Massacre's gameplay, all of this stalking and slashing plays pretty good on the deck. Frame rate fluctuates a bit between the high 40s and 60, so it might be worth locking down to 40 or even 30 if you want a more 5th gen sort of feel. Also, fair warning, you will probably have to make some manual adjustments to the controls to get the best experience. Now, the sticks felt fine, but hitting up on the D-pad to open the costume change menu didn't work for me until I remapped it to V on the keyboard, so some light tinkering will probably be in your future if you pick this one up. But hey, if you have a love for anything with a VHS filter and campy horror schlock this holiday season, I heartily recommend at least checking it out after spending a few hours with it this past weekend. Alright, and that's it for this one. I'm not sure how many games I'll be buying for myself in December because I'm positive I'm going to get at least some Steam gift cards for Christmas from either like friends or family or whatever, since they know I spend so much time on the Steam Deck. But hey, what about you? Did you get anything slick in November? Or are there any games that you're just kind of holding off on for now until, maybe they drop on the winter sale later this month? If so, let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for your time and watching videos here. I really, really appreciate it. Take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.